So if you guys are ready, we got Scott here. We got from PBG. We got Kevin from SHI. We got a bunch of other folks from PBG. If you guys want to take over and talk about, especially I know this interesting topic of Azure Site Recovery.
So thanks, Glenn. I appreciate that. So I hope everybody is having a good start on your morning this morning. I'm going to start off with sharing our screen here, and we're going to go over this this PowerPoint. So again, thank you, Glenn, and sorry to see that Frank wasn't able to be here today, but like you said, he's a great guy, and we really appreciate his support, and he is lending us his environment today so that we can show you guys this demo. So again, my name is Scott Brusso. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of PBG Networks. We're an enterprise solutions infrastructure services firm that focuses primarily on the data center. We have been working in education for over 15 years. The company has been in existence for over 20 years. Along with me today, I have my senior network engineer, Jeff Ivins. We have our systems engineer, Paul Wozniak, and then we also have Kevin Gordon supporting us from SHI, who will talk about how the SNJETC enterprise level agreement will be set up with SHI, how that's taken care of. They handle all the licensing and all that tough end, that back end stuff with Microsoft. So today our topic of discussion is Microsoft Azure, and we're specifically going to be talking about Azure Site Recovery, disaster recovery in minutes, not hours. So let me go on to our next slide here. So what is Microsoft Azure? So I can tell you that in 2020, when we presented this at Texpo, Azure only had a conglomeration of 100 services. So a little over a year later, Azure is now over 200 services, and Azure Site Recovery Manager being one of those services. So the Azure Cloud also includes things like virtual machines, storage, databases, backup, Azure Active Directory, analytics, and so much more. So Azure really is truly becoming one of the main offerings from Microsoft, and they are really covering all the bases and putting a lot of effort in development here. I just wanted to note too that the slide shows that I think it was a year ago, 90% of the Fortune 500. Today, it's 95% of the Fortune 500 are using the Microsoft Azure Cloud and taking advantage of Azure in one way or another. So we're going to go on. So this next slide here is the Gartner Magic Quadrant, just showing where Microsoft is positioned as a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Part of the reason that they're positioned here as a leader is because of their competitive pricing. You're going to see that a little bit later. Paul's going to discuss that. We're going to talk about Microsoft's global reach, their service consistency, and scalability for the future. So everybody knows that Microsoft products can be, somewhat of a difficult thing to implement sometimes, but we can honestly say in relation to Azure, this is one of the few products that Microsoft has gotten right the first time. So we're going to now go into Azure Site Recovery Manager. What is it, and how do I benefit from it? So Azure Site Recovery Manager is a disaster recovery as a service solution. If you'll notice on the on this Gartner Magic Quadrant that we talked about previously, that AWS is not on here. And that's because AWS is primarily designed to host servers, whereas Azure has a focus on disaster recovery. Let's get back. So Again, it's a disaster recovery as a service. And what that means is that your data can be instantaneously accessed from the Azure cloud anywhere in the world. And Azure protects your data at military grade encryption. So there is a lot of security that they've put into place. One of the things that Microsoft has really thought of is segregation of your data. And that's where data resiliency comes in here in our third bullet point. We talked about zones and regions. So if you think of a region would be something like maybe the East Coast or the West Coast, the North or the South. So within those regions, we have multiple zones, or you can consider a zone a data center. So you can pick specific areas that you want your data to be in, and also specific data centers within those areas. Another nice factor is the HIPAA and GDPR standards. So we know that our data is always protected, even when it's at rest in Azure. One of the key things that is really a big advantage of Microsoft Azure, say over an AWS, is the ability to test your disaster recovery or test your failover. So what you can do is in the Azure portal, you can select test failover, and you can actually failover your environment in the cloud. You can look at the servers, and you can make sure everything's operating and your data is all there. And that's a test failover. If you want to do a full failover, you can select that option, and then you can fully failover your servers to Azure. And what that does is that shuts off your servers on-prem. The next thing that we want to talk about is the planned failover capability. I think this is something that's really big for schools. So what I mean about a planned failover here, say a school wants to completely renovate or refresh their data center. You can fail over your entire environment to the cloud. You can refresh the data center. You can take your time. There's not a rush. There's no urgency because everybody doesn't really know that it's in the cloud. It's no disruption at all. Once your environment is back up and running, you can fail back to that environment, and no one will be the wiser that you took anything down. So it's truly a huge capability for schools, providing 100% uptime for any of these server capabilities like Genesis and Systems 3000 and OnCourse or any other enterprise solution that schools are using. The other key thing about Azure Site Recovery Manager is continuous replication. Now, today, that's only possible with VMware. And what I mean there is the minute you put a file on, the file's up in Azure. Now, the target for Hyper-V is 30 seconds. So it's not as close as VMware, but that's still an acceptable time frame. So I want to talk now a little bit about the architecture for setting this up in an environment. So this is your standard architecture. We see the Azure symbol all the way off to the right that represents the Azure cloud. We see a VPN connection there coming out of the firewall. We're going to discuss that VPN in a few more minutes. We have your core switch, your virtualization environment, whether it's Hyper-V and VMware, and almost every school also has physical servers as well that they would like to replicate to the cloud. So Azure Site Recovery Manager has the capability to replicate both physical and virtual machines up to Azure. And you can see here by the red lines denoting that's the Azure traffic, that ASRM uses port 443. Now, for some reason it's missing on here, but it also uses port 9443. So we just wanted to make a note of that. Now, these are internal ports. 443 also goes out through the VPN to Azure. Now, the reason we have that VPN there is so that you can communicate to your servers in the Azure cloud if you fail over. Say you decide to make these servers not publicly available. You just want them to use their NATed addresses. So what we do is we set up routing on your core switch, and then we route the traffic through the VPN to Azure, and you'll be able to get to your servers there. You do also have the option of making your servers publicly available. And there's a couple other things we can do there with that to provide some additional layers of security, like geo-blocking and multi-factor authentication. But if you wanted to make a Genesis server or a Systems 3000 server publicly available, you can do that in less than 7 minutes. So if we notice here, we see the Azure Site Recovery Manager server. I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. That can be either a VM or a physical server. And the purpose of the Azure Site Recovery Manager server is that handles all the replication between your servers in the environment. And it also makes DNS changes and IP address changes on your network when you select a test failover or failover. So the Azure Site Recovery Manager server is really the secret sauce to Microsoft's disaster recovery. It helps to fully automate this. Now we're going to get more into automation in the future. Microsoft, we'll talk more about that at the end of this, about the capabilities coming down the road to do an automatic failover. So we're now going to turn this over to Jeff Ivins, our senior systems engineer here at PBG Networks, and he's going to talk about the setup and configuration.
All right, can everybody hear me okay?
Good.
Excellent. All right, so we're just going to give you a quick tour of how Azure looks in a VMware environment. Again, we want to thank Frank Polero and Linwood Schools. They're the ones that graciously allowed us to show a real life layout of Azure Site Recovery. They have a VMware environment. So what you see here, this server Azure, is the virtual machine that's deployed for ASR. As Scott mentioned, it can be in VMware, it can be a Hyper-V virtual machine, or a physical server. But just for the points of hardware requirements, you see the 8 CPUs and 10 gig of RAM. These aren't numbers that we came up with. In this case, for VMware, Microsoft has an OVF template that is pre-built for everything there. So these hardware requirements are just part of what's rolled out with the template. You don't need to pre-build a server in order to do that. It is Server 2016, so we just want to keep in mind that we do need a license for Server 2016 in order to roll that out. And you'll notice that the storage is 1.3 terabyte. So that's about 80 gig for the operating system, and then two 600 gig drives that handle the replication data. So if you want to walk away with some things to keep in mind that you need, a static IP address is necessary for this server. We also have storage of 1.3 terabyte. Those are musts. Does it have to be domain joined? No, it does not. So just those few things to keep in mind. Now we'll pop into the console here and just show you what the server looks like. You'll see it's just a 2016 server. Once you log in, there's really only a few shortcuts, but this is the one we care about. Microsoft Azure Site Recovery Configuration Manager. It launches a browser, and the first thing that pops up is that you're not going to see here because I'm already signed in, but it asks you to sign into Office 365 as an administrator. So this would be your Office 365 Azure subscription. That's something that we arrange ahead of time before we start the project so that all of these things can happen smoothly. And these options are really all you need to run through to configure ASR. So managing connectivity is the first. This is why the static IP is important, because once this portion is configured, we can't change the IP address again without rebuilding ASR. So a static IP is critical there. As we move on, the next is the Recovery Services Vault. So this Recovery Services Vault here, named ASR Vault, that's the only one that Linwood has. That's in Azure. It's pre-created. That's where the replication data is encrypted and stored. So that's something that we pre-create before we set up things on-prem. And you'll notice, let me just drop that down again. You'll notice here that it's in the West. So when Scott was talking about regions and zones, this is on the West Coast. So if you were failing over, even if the entire Eastern Seaboard fell into the Atlantic, you could, you might not be there to do it, but somebody could fail over that VM up into the cloud for you. Moving on, since this is a VMware setup, We have a connection to vCenter. This is so ASR can survey the virtual machines that are there in order to see what you want to replicate. So credentials are necessary for that. And the last is the virtual machine credentials. You can set up as many as you need, but I usually set up ones for domains and workgroup machines. And if needed, you can also do this for Linux, since Linux machines can be replicated. Basically, the reason why this is necessary is that Azure Site Recovery doesn't just replicate the entire VM, it also does application consistent recovery. So it needs to be able to talk to a VSS writer to stop a database momentarily in order to do those application and not just crash consistent replications. Once that's done, the configuration process runs on its own. It usually takes, we say, between 20 and 30 minutes for that process to finish, and you'll be ready to start replications. Now, the replications aren't actually configured here. They're configured in the Azure portal. So we'll sneak over there in just a moment, but I just want to show you this VM. This is one of the VMs that we're replicating, and we'll call this our demo machine. And it's nothing special, but we do want to draw attention to a command prompt just to show the difference in the networking. So if I do an IP config, you'll see that it's a 172.16 subnet. Now let's slide over to the Azure portal. So here, once we sign into portal.azure.com, we have the recovery services vault, which is what we mentioned earlier. That was pre-created, and here's the vault. So now if we look at what Linwood is replicating, they've got about 6 VMs that they're replicating. And here's the one that we were just talking about, ASR demo. If we want to start a fresh replication, we're not going to set up a replication here, but we see we can do Azure VMs, physical and VMware VMs, and Hyper-V. So there are a number of options there. Each one of them, we say that once you start the replication, depending on the size of the VM, it's going to be about an hour before you can actually fail it over to do all that data syncing. For larger VMs, it can take a little longer. But here on our ASR, ASR demo, we have those 3 little dots, and here's the options that we have. So we have a failover and a test failover. We're going to do a test failover, and we'll come back to those options in a minute to explain them. But we have the options to choose different RPOs. I'll explain that again in just a second. And all we really need to do here, most is pre-configured, is to choose what subnet we want. Scott mentioned earlier that a VPN connects Azure to your local network. In order for that routing to work properly, Azure needs to have a unique subnet for the VMs that are running on there. So that's something that, again, we pre-configure before we start all those on-prem processes. We'll go ahead and kick off that test failover. And you'll see that that's running up there in the right-hand corner. Let's go back to the vault and talk about options while that's running. So we'll come back to the failover and test failover. The only real difference between the two is that the failover shuts off the source VM, and only the VM that's in Azure that was replicated is left running. A test failover, you just want to make sure that it works. So it leaves the source VM running, and you can just test and make sure that everything is replicated properly up. Cleanup test failover, I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Changing the recovery point. So ASR is not a backup solution, it's a disaster recovery solution. So we're not talking about being able to restore back weeks or months. It's a 72-hour RPO. But changing the recovery point may mean that you left on Friday and everything was good, but you come in on Monday and something's wrong with that server. So to be able to change the recovery point means that I can go back to Friday and start up that VM. Or if I need to, just, Sunday. But the idea is that you're not just stuck to the most immediate replication point. You have that 72-hour window. We have the options to commit and complete migration. Committing is selecting a recovery point and sticking to it. So once that's done, the VM is now permanently writing data to whatever's in Azure. Completing a migration, this is for those who they don't want to fail back on site. Perhaps they want to move VMs permanently from their local environment up to the cloud. We have a few on today who have already done that. They have a few VMs that they permanently migrated to the cloud, and they've been there for months. You'll notice that the replication task is done. So we'll just we'll come back to that in just a second. We'll finish these few points. Reprotecting and resynchronizing. This is just about which way the data is headed. If you have a power outage at your local network and you fail over to Azure Site Recovery, you've got a VM running in Azure, but you get the power back up a day or two later, let's say, reprotecting synchronizes that updated data in Azure back locally so that you can fail back to the local VM and everything's good to go. Resynchronize is for the temporary outages. Let's say you lost power, but you're not looking, it's not so much that you need to fail up to Azure. Resynchronize is for a disruption in the replication, and you just need to resume it from Azure or from your local network to the cloud. Reprotect goes from the cloud down. And error details is for something if something's wrong with the replication. Disable replication is that last thing. It's critical because it's not pausing replication. If you disable replication, you're deleting the data that's on site, or I'm sorry, in Azure. So that means that if you want to start it up, you got to do the initial replication all over again. So if you want to disable, you got to really be sure about that. So now we have, let's show you the VM that's actually running. So here's our test VM, Azure demo test. This is the test failover, and there's the IP address, 172.168.5.4. So we notice it's a different IP address from the local subnet, and we're going to go ahead and see if we can reach out to it over RDP. So this is traveling across the VPN. And we'll go ahead and let that log in. Now, just to show you that this is a test, this is the test failover. So the source VM, it's still running. We can still do things to it. There it is. That's all still good to go. So we're not disrupting what's happening locally when you do a test failover. This just lets you know your production environment's good. I'm happy. But then we come back here to our replicated VM. This is our test failover. We'll just let that finish signing in. And there we go. We're all signed in. And here's our happy VM. And we'll just show real quick. I'll pull up the command prompt. And just to show that we're traveling to those two different VMs, there's our 172.168.5.4. So there we go. We have a live VM running in just a few minutes. Usually, you're not looking for that like right away, but we have the ability to do that in just a few minutes in the event of a disaster situation. So that sounds great. It looks good, but you're probably going to ask yourself, how much is this going to cost me? So Paul's going to go over how Microsoft really is competitive with their pricing for this solution. Paul?
Thank you, Jeff. So I'm going to share my screen here. If you're wondering what is an easy way in order to see what is Microsoft's pricing for this, well, I got bad news for you. There is no easy way. Microsoft's going to make you do a little bit of work. I know, shocking, right? But what you'll be able to do is use an Microsoft Azure Calculator, and you can find that by typing that into any search engine, Azure Calculator, and it's usually the first option that comes up. It'll look something like this on Microsoft's website. As a basic estimation of what is this going to cost me on a month-to-month, there's really only two components that you're going to need to grab from these tabs here on storage. One is the storage accounts, obviously, because you'll be storing data up there. Another one is from the migration tab, which is Azure Site Recovery. And you notice that adds it to our calculator right here. You can scroll right down and see this little estimation in what Microsoft calls the Azure Calculator. In our storage accounts, which is our first piece in the calculator, you'll notice a number of options to choose from, those regions that we talked about, what type of storage you're using, the performance of that storage, whether it's local or zone redundant. We're going to leave those on the defaults for the purpose of this demo. What we will change is how much storage we're using. let's go ahead and say we're looking at 5 terabytes of data that we want to store up in Azure. As a basic price without any discounts or just the upfront price, you'll see here is called pay-as-you-go. We're looking at about $106 with a couple of write and read operations down here, which are negligible in cost. You're looking at $107 for just storing 5 terabytes of data up there each month. The second component for Azure Site Recovery is it will ask us how many instances are you restoring or recovering to. You'll notice here it asks us recover to Azure. So for the purpose of this demo, we'll say we want to do 10 machines. That's 10 instances, $25 each. That's $250. So in an ideal world, you will never have a disaster. You'll just have this as a fail-safe. You'll have 10 machines and 5 terabytes of data, which might be a little high for 10 machines, but that's okay. And on a month to month, on a high number, you're looking at $350 a month. Now, that's nice because we're not talking thousands of dollars. We're talking tens or a few $100s every month in order to have this capability sitting there ready to flip that switch. And again, that is on the pay-as-you-go model, which can be reduced further with yearly reserve pricing. But what if you do have to flip that switch? What if you have a disaster and you have to run those machines up in the cloud? Well, we can calculate or estimate that as well. If you go back up in your calculator, we're going to grab a couple other components. From the compute tab, we'll grab the virtual machines, obviously. And from networking, we'll grab IP addresses, we'll grab bandwidth, and we'll grab the VPN gateway. So now if you scroll back down your calculator, and again, we can spend a whole hour just talking about how to use this, and this changes from month to month. Microsoft is constantly updating this. In virtual machines, you'll see something similar to what we looked at for storage. What region do you want this in? You're already familiar with Windows or Linux operating system. You can even indicate if this is an SQL server. But you'll notice here under instances, if you select this drop down, whoa, you're greeted with a wall of text, a whole lot of instances. How are you going to choose what CPU works for you? Well, Microsoft does help you a little bit. If you click this link right here, learn more about reserved VM instant prices. You'll get a new tab that opens, and you can click this link here for Windows pricing details. Microsoft breaks this down a little bit for you into different categories. If we scroll down, you'll see general purpose, compute optimized, memory optimized. So you can go through these different categories and read what each one has. For example, we see these B series categories are for microservices, proof of concept. So if we're looking for production servers, we might want to scroll something down to like the D2A. And you can see there's a number of CPUs here to pick from. Let's take a look at this first guy here, D2A version 4. That has 2 CPUs, 8 gigs of RAM, 50 gigs of temporary storage. That might be good for an average production VM up in Azure just to run during a disaster. Again, you'll notice here's your pay-as-you-go price, but you'll notice they'll break out the 1-year reserve, 3-year reserve. That means you can pay for this upfront and you'll get additional discounts. And then you'll notice here, Azure hybrid benefit pricing is an additional toggle. What exactly is that? Well, if we come back to our calculator, under savings options, you'll see that next to that pay-as-you-go, it's listed under OS licensing, which means hybrid benefit allows you to take your Windows licensing from your virtual machine with you when you fail up to Azure. So we're going to see if we can find that instance from this list. And that's always a challenge during a live demo. I think I found this guy right here, 2 CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, 50 gigs of temporary storage. Let's say we're looking at 10 instances. So that's 10 virtual machines right here. 730 hours simulates them running 24/7 for 30 days. That's a full month. And then let's go ahead and to manage disks. We'll pop in here 10 managed disks because we have 10 virtual machines. And then storage transactions and bandwidth are a few other options you can explore with your virtual machine instance. outbound transfer for that bandwidth, even if we bump that up from 5 gigs to 50 gigs, you can see $2.25. That's not a big part of the cost. Scrolling down to IP addresses, Microsoft changes how many free IP addresses it gives you. Right now, we're going to pop in 10 static IP addresses running for a full month. You can see that's $26 there. And then going down to bandwidth, even if we increase that from 5 to 50, you can see bandwidth is not a big chunk of your budget. The last portion is the VPN. Again, you can choose which region that's coming out of, and you can choose a basic VPN or an express route gateway, which can get pretty pricey, but you can choose different speeds of that VPN as well. We're going to stick with the basic VPN for now and simulate that for running 30 days again. And you can see there, that's $26 for that basic VPN. And now if you scroll down to the bottom of this calculator, you can see your estimated monthly cost right there. If you had a disaster, you have 5 terabytes of data and 10 virtual machines you need to run for a full 30 days, that's less than $2,000. You have that ability to have that running without a disruption, everything's up. For most environments, that's a pretty low cost to pay for that peace of mind. But again, you can reduce that price further. Just to show you, if we scroll back up to the virtual machine calculation, let's say I'm going to take advantage of the Azure hybrid benefit. Let's bring my Windows licensing with me and give me that 40% discount. I'll pay for 1 year upfront. And we drop back down to our estimate at the bottom. Look at that. It dropped it from almost $2,000 to $900. So you can see there's substantial savings to be had, which Kevin from SHI will talk about that a little bit more. When you're done your calculation, you can hit export right here, and that will export that over to an Excel document that you can then save. And I'll open that up so you can see what it looks like. And this way you can have everything recorded for your benefit. What we like to do is work with that top number, and we can tell clients, look, it's going to be anywhere below this dollar amount. So you'll be pleasantly surprised when you get the bill. At this point, I'm going to stop my screen share and hand it back over to Scott from PBG Networks.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I'd like to introduce Kevin Gordon. He's the district sales manager from SHI, and he's going to talk about handling the Azure side with the billing. Kevin.
Hey, Scott, I have a quick question. It's Frank Summers from eShim. Can you send us that spreadsheet you just did, just so we have a kind of a base thing to look at?
Yeah, absolutely. We can send that to you.
Great.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Scott. Good to see everyone. I don't know if you are all familiar with SHI, but I certainly recognize some faces out there. Mike Estrada and Theo, good to see you guys. So let me share my screen here. Okay. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we got you.
Cool. If I had a nickel for every time I said that over the last year. All right. So who we are, SHI, we're an $11 billion state contract IT solutions provider and reseller right up the road in Somerset, New Jersey. Top partners with all the big manufacturers, Dell, Microsoft, HP, Cisco. If you name it, we've more likely than not won a top 3 partner of the year award from pretty much everyone in the last decade or so. So fun fact about us, we actually sell more Microsoft than Microsoft does itself, which is why Scott and team have brought us in here. And then on the procurement side of things, we're on over 20 contract vehicles throughout the state, including the NJEDC, NJSBA, the state software contract, and just a multitude of co-ops. So with that, I'll move on to getting set up on Azure. So there's a few different ways to go about it. If you have an EES agreement currently, or if you're looking into an EES agreement, it's certainly the most cost-effective overall agreement from Microsoft that we can add Azure onto. Through EESs, we can leverage NJEDC pricing, which is actually the best hands down best Microsoft pricing that the state offers. If you're not a member of NJEDGE, it's certainly simple to get signed up for that, and I can send you out some info on that after the call's all said and done. Approximately minimum wise for either of these two agreements, we're looking at about $100 a month minimum monthly commitment to Azure. And then in some instances too, if you don't have your EES agreement set up through SHI, we can actually make an amendment to that agreement and put Azure on it through SHI, or you could do it through your current reseller. It's it's really up to you on how you want to leverage us here. So another type of agreement that we can add Azure onto is OVS ES licensing. Just about, I'd say probably 95 to 99% of active agreements that are out there right now are going to qualify for an Azure add-on. Same deal there. It's about $100 a month minimum monthly commitment. And then I did want to note too, for both of these two, OVS and EES, Azure isn't considered a qualifying product if it's just stood up by itself. So you would need to add it to a current agreement that would have different sets of licensing on it that you're already buying through Microsoft. So the third way to purchase would be through traditional open licensing, MOLP through Microsoft, but we're really trying to steer all of our customers away from this, for the next 8 months or so, because Microsoft is actually doing away with MOLP licensing on December 31st of this year. So yeah, we can still do it, but in terms of longevity, it's not really recommended. So best practice in really determining which licensing program to take would be to jump on a call with your SHI account executive and one of our Microsoft licensing executives. They can review all of your purchase history on the different types of agreements that you've had over the last decade or so, and we can take a look into what's best going to fit your organization. And most of the time, let's say 9 times out of 10, we'll present you with 2 or 3 different options to go over with your team and see what works best. So like I had mentioned, we sell more Microsoft than Microsoft does itself. So we have, I think it's 140 or 150 licensing employees here that are strictly experts on talking you through your challenges. So. And then next up, Azure training. So I like to use terrible analogies if any one of you have ever been on a call with me before, but I kind of see it as, I've been riding a bicycle since I was 6 years old and consider myself an expert now. But if you put me on a motorcycle, there's a good chance I'm going to be a little wobbly and might even fall off of it. So we want to make sure that when you guys are going through all this and starting your Azure journey, that you have as much training as humanly possible. And we offer a few different options for you. We usually suggest to our customers too to even take a look at a couple of these just to kind of blend where you're getting your resources from. So SHI, we actually acquired a company called CTG, which has a massive training portal. Acquired them a couple of years ago, and Azure training is included in here. There's also a myriad of other manufacturers. There's your VMwares, your Veeams, you name it. There's over 500 unique trainings in this one. It's about $18 to $22 per user per year. So there's a couple different options that you can select, but Azure is included in all the different offerings that we have on there. So tons of Microsoft trainings in here as well. The second one that we like to suggest is LinkedIn Learning. I am sure that a few schools are already signed up for LinkedIn Learning, so there are Azure trainings in here as well. The cost for LinkedIn is about $19.99 per user per month, but you have access to 16,000 learning courses, not just around the Azure side, but I mean, there's just about everything in here. It's almost endless. The SHI management team actually uses LinkedIn Learning as well to kind of talk about different management strategies and how to lead our reps to be better salespeople. So certainly recommend the LinkedIn Learning. And then if you wanted to do some trainings directly through the manufacturer itself, Microsoft has what's called Microsoft Learn. The link for that is right below, and it's free to sign up. And I believe that they give you $200 in site credit to kick everything off. And it's not necessarily a portal setup. You do the trainings on a one-by-one basis, and they all have different costs associated with them. and they all kind of vary from top to bottom there. So if you guys have any questions at all on the licensing aspect of everything here, feel free to reach out to me. It's Kevin_Gordon@shi.com, just like the spelled just like the NASCAR driver, and I will connect you to your account executive, and then they can set up a call with our Microsoft licensing team. So are there any questions on that? Good to go. Cool.
Thank you very
Alright.
much, Kevin. I truly
Thanks, guys.
appreciate that. Thanks
Of course.
for helping us out, explaining the because to go into it, the side of Azure with the billing is actually pretty complex, and Shai has been a great partner in helping us to make that a smooth transition for many schools in New Jersey. So the question I have is can you afford not to back up to the cloud? So you saw Jeff do a demonstration and live failover of Azure Site Recovery Manager. You saw Paul go through some of the pricing, and then Kevin was kind enough to go through the backend billing and how that is all set up through SNJETC. So we truly appreciate everybody's effort. But the point here is with ransomware, malware, and all that is going on with schools today, and the very small prices for this, it's something that every school should really be doing. So, you have to ask yourself that question: can you afford not to back up to the cloud? So at this point, we're going to have questions or comments, and if anybody has any experiences who is already using Azure, we would love to hear those as well. So are there any questions or comments?
Sure, I'll chime in real quick. I was just going to say, and by the way, everyone who can't see me, it's Micah Stratton with South Plainfield Schools. I've probably been using this for about at least 3 years now. And one of the things I'll say is I saw when you guys did your calculations, you had 10 servers on there. So when I actually do my calculations, probably only have 3 or 4, because what I'm really looking at is more mission critical. What's going to happen when my superintendent calls me and says nothing's working right now? What do they care about getting up right now? So usually I'm worried about my budgetary and accounting, my student database, making sure I have a DC to talk to, and transportation. So we're probably only worrying about 3 or 4. And I could say that when we started with the whole pandemic and everything going on here, for those using Systems 3000, you're dealing with RDP, old client server situation. So we actually failed that guy right over to Azure as soon as we went remote. Since we put it up there, I don't think we brought it back down. So now we just run that up there all the time. We do use the Azure monetary commitment with SHI, and had bundled it all that way. But I'd say probably all over for Azure Site Recovery, maybe a little over $200 a month just for those few servers that we're actually spinning up there. And not for nothing, for $200 a month, I can sleep at night. And that's really why I do it. I don't know if anybody else here is also using the site recovery.
Thanks a lot, Mike. We appreciate that chiming in on your experiences. Were there any other questions or comments?
So just so I'm clear on the pricing, if we're just in failover and we haven't actually spun, not failover, if we're just doing the site recovery, the only cost on Azure would be for the storage and the migration costs, and that's pretty minimal. It's when we actually fail over and spin up these things and actually need to use them that we get into the compute, the network, the bandwidth, the VPN gateway costs. Is that right?
So the VPN cost is something that you have whether you fail over or not, because the VPN has to be continuously running, and so that you're ready for that failover. The storage costs are very minute. We have schools with one particular school who's moved 40 terabytes of data up there, and they're spending less than $10,000 a year. So he, and he has the failover capability. He just hasn't had to use it yet.
Okay.
So,
it'd be nice to. I'm sorry that Frank's not here because I see that we're demoing his system. his instance of the site recovery server, he might have something to say as well. I appreciate Mike Estrada chiming in, letting us know, getting some feedback from actual usage.
Yeah, I know Frank has told us that he has found that the cost to be minimal, just like we said. Unfortunately, the problem that we have is with pricing is their estimates. So it's really hard when a school comes back and wants a finite number. It's hard because we don't know, the amount of transactions that are going to occur on the server. So Microsoft's got a clock that's running. You're getting billed 24/7 for these. One of the things we found to curtail the expenses even further is you can schedule, if you're not using your server in the evening, we can schedule with a script to shut the server off and then turn it back in the morning when everybody comes in. So if you don't need to have your servers running from 9, 10 o'clock at night till 5 or 6 in the morning, we can script it so that the server shut off and then turn back on automatically.
Yeah, that's definitely something I'd recommend. I know we do that with our Systems 3000 server. Just because, and I believe Scott might go over this, was you sending data up to Azure, not very costly. You pulling that data back down from Azure is where they kind of get you with the cost. So when I'm having users constantly connect to it for RDP sessions, that's where they can get you a little bit with the cost. But once you put on that hybrid benefit, like use your own license, you probably already have your own Microsoft licenses, make sure to apply that to the server. It really drops the cost. Probably our monetary commitment for our district would probably pay about $10K a year. The good part is, as far as like any overages, it's not like, a cell phone provider or anything like that. Like you're going to get railed with overages. The overage is the same cost you're paying whether you went over or not. So the good part is say you set something like 10K for your year for your budget. You find out you go over by 1,000, just next year budget 12K, and send that for your monetary commitment. But you're not going to get railed in overage costs or anything like that.
Thanks again, Mike. And
Yeah. The hard thing with Azure and AWS, any of these cloud-based virtual servers, and my VA likes a number that she can plug into a budget for, so it's hard. It's kind of like a utility. You don't know what you're going to pay to heat the buildings every year. That's kind of the way I was approaching it with her. You got to think of it like a utility, and you just got to budget what you forecast a number would be, and then hope you come in underneath of that.
Exactly. And in most cases, we have had schools come in, they're coming in underneath of that budget. So that's the purpose of the Azure Calculator, to give you that rough number, to give you that estimate. Really it's about, like Mike said, the most he's spending is 10K a year. If you think about the impact of ransomware hitting a school, we didn't really talk about all the snapshotting and recovery points, but you can snapshot up to 200 times. So that'll give you the capability, if you do get ransomware, to go back and discover where, at what point you got hit with that, go back before that point and recover your servers. So when you think about $10,000, I can tell you from our experience, because schools have been hit left and right this year with ransomware. It started right off in January. We got the first couple schools hit. The $10,000 was nothing compared to what they had to pay to repair their environments. And in most schools, like I said, we have one school with 40 terabytes of data up there. He's spending less than $10,000 a year too.
I think another good one too is just being able to basically set your recovery point to a different geolocation, because that allowed us to move a lot of things to fully digital, especially with budgetary and accounting. Because if you want to go digital and not have the million filing cabinets and everything, you have to actually exist in different time zones. Otherwise, you can't move that data.
Right. Another good point. Thanks, Mike. If there's no further questions, I know you guys are busy today. I know Frank had told us that he's going to make this publicly available to us. So we'll put this on our website and provide a link to anybody who wants to see it. And if you need any other further information, feel free to reach out to myself. You can go to our website, or you can go to info@pbgnetworks.com, and we will respond back to you and answer your questions the best that we can. So I just want to thank the Southern New Jersey Ed Tech Council for having us present here, and especially Frank for taking the time to lend us his environment and everything else. And if there's no other questions, we're done at this point.
Thank you, Scott, and Paul, and Jeff, and Kevin. Did I miss anybody? Thank you for your time this morning. Very informative. I think it's something I'm certainly looking at as well. I know we've had a conversation, Scott. I'll tell you what, because we don't know what's going on with Frank, just shoot me the link and I'll send it out to the group for that, the PowerPoint, the slide deck. I also threw Scott's email and Kevin's email into our agenda. So if you guys need to reach out to SHI or PBG, that's a good place to start.
All right. Well, I again thank everybody. We're going to leave now, and I hope you have a great meeting, and everyone have a very nice day. Take care.
Thanks, guys.